Buenos dias, good morning. First and foremost, I want to thank you all for giving me this opportunity to speak about my year serving as a global missionary for the ELCA's YAGM, Young Adults and Global Mission Program, for supporting me through prayer, financially, and for receiving my newsletters and reading them. Hopefully, if you got to read those newsletters, they helped you learn and experience a little glimpse of what life in Mexico was like for me. Hamba Nati Mukulu Wetu. Come walk with me, the journey is long. These are lyrics to a song I learned back in April 2018 while attending the discernment and interview process for YAGM. I didn't know how true those words would be until I got back into the United States. Though my time serving in country has come to an end and I feel as though my journey has really just begun, and boy, will it be long. I am slowly processing and trying to transition back to life in the United States while still staying true to what I learned and how I grew abroad, trying not to fall back into old habits and routines. How do I speak about my year, and how do I share these stories with all of you? How do I show appreciation for my neighbors, friends, and family I gained in Mexico while being at home? I know that I can't cover everything now, and it is something I will continue to wrestle with. Today's gospel reads, "Do not be afraid, little flock, for your Father has been pleased to give you the kingdom." This verse really stood out to me. We are God's little flock, his disciples, and he has given us this kingdom here on earth and in heaven. God's kingdom extends to our neighbors here in the United States and around the world. And that is what I learned during my time in Mexico. I lived in Tlaxcala, about a 2.5-hour bus ride east of Mexico City. Tlaxcala is this beautiful town nestled in the valley of mountains with roads made of stone. I worked and lived at Proyecto San Isidro, a ranch and organization dedicated to sustainability, bioconstruction, and water restoration. Proyecto San Isidro hosts many different workshops throughout the year on bioconstruction, painting with natural resources, healthy eating, and day workshops on water restoration. I primarily worked in the garden, planting and watering and harvesting the crops, feeding and caring for the rabbits and the ducks. Occasionally, though, I got to help and participate in the workshops we hosted. I learned about how this organization was able to reforest 2 barren mountains over 40 years simply by planting seeds and retaining water on those mountains. This picture is a workshop we hosted of water restoration with college students. They came up and helped us put bales of hay and tires in the dirt so that when the rainy season came, we were able to keep water on those mountains to help all of the seedlings and saplings that we were growing on those mountains. How they continued to be passionate about helping others learn about bioconstruction and its importance for the earth. How to care and nurture this land God has given us. Though we are celebrating God's work, our hands today, this was something that was a constant thought and reflection for me throughout my time in Mexico. Especially on those days where I spent hours sorting seeds or sitting in the cafe I worked at for hours with what seemed like nothing to do. This is where the mission of accompaniment really came into play. How to learn to sit and be with the people you are with, and just how simply being there can bring them so much joy. The gospel continues. Sell your possessions and give to the poor. Though I left most of my belongings here in the States, I felt like I took an abundance of items with me. Between clothing and a guitar, I promised myself I was going to learn, and a few items that mean a lot to me. Okay, what I'm really talking about is my Build-A-Bear stuffed animal, Johnny the turtle, that I got in 4th grade. I didn't sell anything, and I didn't have money to give. Instead, I packed my things up and put them in a storage for a year. I found myself in a place that truly welcomed me, a host community that seemed to give me so much more than I could ever give them. They invited me to plenty of parties and comidas, which are the largest meal of the day that normally starts with a soup and continues with rice and beans and a full entree and then dessert, and it's abundance of food and you never leave hungry. They took me to waterfalls and to get lattes. They shared their family stories and recipes with me, the history of the town and the state I had the privilege of calling home. The only thing I could give them was my presence and head nodding when I couldn't quite keep up with the language. Though the gospel tells us to give to the poor, we are surprised at their willingness and wanting to give and to provide for us, and how even though they can have so little, what they have in their hearts is so much bigger. Verse 34, for where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Sometimes treasure is not a tangible thing. For me, all of my true treasures are intangible. The life I got to live in Mexico and the love and support I had from afar. My heart is still in all of these places, getting pictures of Isa, my niece in Mexico, and getting questions from Oscar about the pop culture sayings and phrases we have here in the United States, and when the right time to use them is. The other day, he asked me if instead of saying, okay, that's really cool, can I use the phrase, it's lit? And I said, of course. My heart continues to be with my family here and there, knowing that I can take my treasures with me wherever I go is a true blessing. I was talking to my dear friend and fellow Mexico Yagam volunteer, Courtney, the other day, and she reminded me of a poem we heard at orientation last August called Passover Remembered, written by Alla Renee Bozarth. Though I must admit I couldn't remember that poem she was talking about until I looked it up, it reminded me of our gospel today. Though it is far too long to share with you in full today, I will share part of it with you. Pack nothing. Bring only your determination to serve and your willingness to be free. Don't wait for the bread to rise. Take nourishment for the journey, but eat standing. Be ready to move at a moment's notice. When we heard these words at orientation, we were all confused. Pack nothing. What does that mean? We definitely need to pack clothes for this year, right? However, what we soon learned was packing nothing meant not packing preconceived ideas about what our year would look like, the communities and the people we would meet. It was about going into our year with an open mind and an open heart. That from the outside, we don't know these people's stories and what they have gone through. We quickly learned that even though we all lived very different lives in Mexico, that parts of our communities were all the same and had the same struggles or beauties. In one of my newsletters, I wrote about my friend Hugo. I met Hugo while my cohort and I were in Mexico City on a walking tour before heading to Douglas, Arizona to renew our visas. Hugo was a kind person that really just wanted to have a conversation. As we walked, I asked him questions about his marriage and how hard that was, seeing as even though he married a documented US citizen, he was still removed from the only place he ever called home. I learned about his hardships getting sent to a country that he never knew, a country where he didn't really know the language or the culture. Though Hugo was thrown into this new life in Mexico, he continues to stay hopeful and knows to take nourishment in this journey God has sent him on, to be ready on his feet for when God calls him home to his husband and sisters in the United States. Talking with him, seeing his hopes and love for a country that continues to give him so many struggles really overwhelmed me. He continuously chooses love and looks for God to support. Hugo taught me that even in the hard and frustrating times, God tells us to choose love and to be ready for what he has planned. Verse 35 tells us, be dressed, ready for service, and keep your lamps burning. Talking with Hugo that day, I knew he was keeping his light burning and was dressed ready for service. He spent hours talking with me and my cohort about his life and his story and wasn't ashamed of the hardships he's gone through. We renewed our visas about halfway through the year, which brought a lot of homesickness and a lot of antsiness. We thought we could take a break from this and thought we always had to be on our feet, ready to go and ready for the next thing. And though we did a lot of learning and observing this week, we were still being challenged and asked the hard questions. That just because we were away from our host communities, our lamps continued to burn. To listen to these stories like Hugo's and to bring them back home with us. On top of that, we had to book our flights back home and start figuring out what would come next. In the middle of this really amazing but challenging year, you think you are going to go home and everything will be different and you'll be this whole new person. that you know who exactly you are and what you want to do, that you are going to jump right into the mix of things and get involved in the government with policies, in nonprofit work, or with social justice issues, especially after hearing story after story like Hugo's. However, I will be the first one to tell you that the minute I got back, I couldn't wait to buy some kombucha and get my hair done. That though I knew people were curious about what I did in Mexico, I didn't want to get right into it. I wanted time to just relax. Even though change and living a life of service is something I am passionate about, I am realizing that I am still me. And just because I did a year abroad doesn't mean everything changes or that those changes come right away. That all of those things come with the journey. I encourage you to continue to reach out to me and ask more questions, especially the hard ones, the challenging ones that really make you think. As this is just a small part of what life was like in Mexico, I encourage you to think about where you already choose love in your everyday life and where you can challenge yourself to see love and to choose love. To remember that every day we are doing God's work with our hands, the work you can physically see being done, like raking up a yard, or all those intangible things as well, like how our police officers and firefighters are continuing to keep us safe. Hamba nati mukulu wetu. Come walk with me, the journey is long. Amen.